Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Hey everybody, it's Jason. It's great to be back. I'm joined again by our co-host Scott Michael Childers. You doing okay?
I'm doing wonderfully.
Great, me too. So last time we talked about the consequences of the action of the writer, and that was a big focus on world building and setting, I think would be fair to say. Don't you think? So this time we want to talk about the consequences of actions inside your story. Mostly things the characters do, and I suppose things that might happen to the characters too. But the example you had used in our little post talk, where if you go down to town square and start swinging a sword, somebody might call the police.
Yeah, someone's going to notice something. Depending on what time frame you're talking about, depends how fast the police will get there. But that's historical fiction again. But it does go to show, you may have a really cool fight scene in the middle of a street. What are the villagers doing? What are the citizens doing? What is the local law enforcement doing? Are they going to let it play out and then take the winner to jail? Are they going to intervene? I mean,
yeah. Well, and then to stick with that example, what about the bystanders? Your sword accidentally slashes off somebody's arm. Then what happens to that person? Do you need to write about that guy losing his business as a butcher because he's lost his arm? You know, how far do you need to take some of that stuff?
Well, I think in that case, as far as it advances the plot,
yeah,
I mean, let's say this one-armed butcher comes back. That is a cool name for a villain, by the way, the one-armed butcher. Sounds like something out of a kung fu movie. It probably is, actually. But if they come back, hey, instant revenge plot, right? There's a consequence to the guy who was throwing his sword around, that the one-armed butcher comes back. You know, an arm for an arm, eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Piece of pork roast for $5.99 a pound.
So, yeah, I mean, you know, chopping off that arm might have to make you redraw your outline.
But then it creates a long-term storyline.
That's true. That is true. How much effort do you think you need to put into planning some of this stuff out?
Well, it kind of depends on what type of writer you normally are, right? If you're normally a pantser, you're not going to be plotting this stuff out anyway.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff might go somewhere or might be cut in revision.
Right. And if you're on the extreme outlining phase, you've already planned out that the person who loses his arm in Act 1 is going to be a major part in Act 3, page 7, chapter.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding about that far.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying, though.
But I think one of the things we wanted to really get across, though, is when your character does something, they're not in a vacuum. They are in a setting with other characters or NPCs, if you're a gamer, right? And what they do affects other lives, whether it is someone that you'll meet again or not. And it could create conflicts or setbacks for your main character or side characters. You know, all of a sudden they're a wanted person in that village.
Yeah. Or
maybe they're now a hero of that village, right? They can come back and get whatever supplies they need for that village because they got rid of the one-armed butcher.
Yeah.
Or they can't come anywhere in the county because one-armed butcher's brother was a sheriff. You know, where do you go with some of these things, and what does that mean for your character? It helps create a richer story if your characters aren't just in the vacuum and they're the only actions that happen.
I think a problem we have that a lot of writers have is that you tend to write things to benefit your main character or the story you've created, and you overlook a lot of that.
Well, would you say that sometimes you go too far just to advance the plot, even though what actually you're writing wouldn't happen because the consequences don't match up to the actions?
Could be.
Well, okay. Let's take the example where you need to have the villain die.
Okay.
Right? But the villain, it's not the outright evil person. It's a well-respected citizen, and only the hero knows that this person is a bad guy.
Okay.
So the guy comes in, kills him in Main Street. Is that the end of the story? Well, it shouldn't be, because that villain, no one else knew was a bad guy except the hero. Now it looks like this guy just killed Bob, the nice one-armed butcher, for no reason.
Yeah.
But I've seen people, they kill the villain, now that's the end of the story because the villain is dead.
Yeah.
It doesn't
and
make
now
sense.
what? Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, though. They've been hiding so long, and your character does something, and because the story doesn't require that citizens get in an outrage, they move on. It kills that whole...
Yeah.
Why was this guy the secret bad guy to begin with, then?
Right. And, of course, the problem with that is if a reader notices that, then you just lost your reader.
Yes. Yeah, and that's part of the issue that we've been stumbling around here is if there's no consequences to what your hero is doing, then there's too many jumps in logic that a reader has to follow to stay with that story.
Yeah.
And I think another thing, and correct me if you feel the opposite of this, is if there are no consequences to the protagonist's actions, then it comes off along the dreaded Mary Sue syndrome, where everything goes right.
Right.
There's never anything going wrong. The main character's actions are always the correct one. It's this bland, tasteless story that has no conflict, and nothing matters, really.
You're talking about 80s WWF again.
I don't know.
No edge until Hulk Hogan started touching Miss Elizabeth to lift her up a little bit. Then there were consequences.
There are consequences, brother.
Yeah, WrestleMania 5.
But yeah, I mean, if there's no consequences to the hero's actions in a situation where there should be, then again, that whole world building that you've been trying to do and that engrossing story you've been trying to write dies.
Yeah. You know, I suppose they did that fairly well with The Dark Knight. You know, when Harvey Dent dies and then Batman is blamed. Is that what happened?
It's been a while, so I don't remember the exact... I'll have to rewatch.
That was kind of the gist of it. I suppose they didn't want to announce that he was Two-Face because they didn't want people to...
They wanted people to remember Harvey Dent, the good guy.
Yeah, and so Batman's actions had consequences. You know, that's what I never liked about... I mean, I haven't been a big comic guy for a long time, but when I was, what I didn't like about some of the superheroes was that they didn't have consequences, really. I mean, there was no... Superman saves the day, and that's that.
Yeah, and Superman demolishes a building in the meanwhile, but he can save the day.
Right, it's like, who cares about that building?
And I don't know, maybe it's a postmodernistic take on things, but I do find that if I'm reading something where the consequences are just ignored, it just takes the story out of what used to be. Unless there are a couple of types of situations where the consequences don't matter. Silver Age comic books, right? That wasn't the tale that they were going to tell anyway. Children's cartoons, children's picture books, sometimes you ignore the consequences, sometimes. But most part, when you're writing, that's part of it, right?
Yeah. And that's because that's real life.
Yeah. If I would suddenly... Well, okay, here's the thing. If I would be standing out in the middle of the road, holding a ghetto blaster over my head, blaring some music, the consequences would be I would be arrested for stalking.
Unless it was Peter Gabriel.
It would not be a touching love story. This is where rom-coms, their consequences are completely wrong. That would be a stalking move.
Yes.
Right? I'm disturbing the peace, and I'm stalking some gal.
Yeah.
Right?
It wouldn't be cute like in those movies, would it?
No, especially if I was doing it, it would not be cute. But see, that's the thing. The consequence of that action does not seem to match up with the expectations. Now, to that movie's point, they're building that whole world subtly as you go along, so when it comes to that scene, it makes sense. But in other stories, that consequences makes... There should be a consequence to someone out there with that.
All of those movies are about stalkers.
Yeah, there's a whole other discussion with
Wow.
that. Yeah, don't get your dating tips
You
from
just blew my
rom-coms.
mind. Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay then.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that. There's a whole other realm of rom-com versus reality, but that's outside of our...
Okay, that'll be a bonus track sometime.
Oh, man. So anyway, well, and here's the thing. If we got into that discussion at length, the consequence would be no one would listen to this podcast anymore.
And we'd have to go back and edit the title.
Yes, so we won't.
So there's little things like that. Yeah, little actions you make. Another one I wrote down here, other character traits your character they have to be consistent. If you think it'd be neat to say this character had something traumatic happen to him when he was a kid, and you just throw in a flashback because you think it'd be neat and add some depth, well, you have to make sure that character still is affected by it. I don't want to say like personal demons, but don't give your dark a dark past if it's not going to matter.
Don't give them extra baggage for a trip they're not taking.
Right. Perfect. The Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which I'm sure the movie will be fine. I don't know if it's even come out. I'm still mad at him for that last book. But he gives that character a dark past, and there's so many flashbacks to that past, but that all those flashbacks matter as, they help build the character.
Mm-hmm.
But he could have just as easily not made any of that matter, and then you're just wasting your time writing flashbacks.
Oh, okay.
I suppose. And same thing with bad habits. One of my bad habits used to be I would just have a character smoke. I don't know, maybe because I used to smoke, but it's like there's no point if it doesn't serve to build the character. You're just throwing in a detail, and then if you forget about it...
Well, and in that case, you're actually possibly bringing in an addiction.
Yeah.
And so that would affect actions and choices.
Right.
And
if you want to have your character smoking cigarettes just for fun, then you better have him out of breath when he's running away from the serial killer, who's probably Bob the One-Armed Butcher.
Man, that Bob just doesn't get a break today.
Nope. So, just little choices your character makes should affect your character later on. Otherwise, I think they're just pointless details. Probably fit more in the last time's discussion.
Well, they are kind of connected because your character is part of the world, right? So decisions in the world affect what possible consequences the characters could see. Maybe they're in a world where cigarettes actually improve your lung capacity. Maybe they're anti-death sticks or whatever. Maybe there's some sort of chemical in them that only athletes smoke. But that would be, here's the world, and then this character chose to smoke these super cigs in that world, and so they're related. Now, but in something grounded in Earth-based reality, yeah, you're right.
No, it's so interesting because so many. Like Theme of Absence, I'll read so many stories that people will just have their character do something or give their character a trait that doesn't matter. And it's really, I feel like they're just doing that because they're thinking, well, I need to have this something unique about this character, so I'll give him long hair. Well, that's fine. How does long hair affect him later on? If it doesn't, then why have it? If it's going to get pulled and he's, in a fight, then it's there.
Well, especially in that case, you're talking short stories or flash fiction.
Oh, sure.
So those are words that could be spent much better in a much better way on some other meaningful detail. Unless, like you're saying, the hair gets tugged or the hair gets shaved and it's now suddenly traumatic because they had the story of Samson, right? The long hair mattered in that story. So yeah, that's a great thing. It's like why does a character have these things? In some cases, in longer stories where you need to flesh out characters a little bit more, describing their traits just to have them is okay because it fleshes out it creates a richer picture long term. But again, those short stories or flash fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, in some of these, you don't even need to worry about the gender
Right.
of the hero, because you don't. Flash fiction, boom, 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 done. Right. Unless that's part of the point that you're trying to make. So.
Yeah, it just goes back to what we always like to say. Make sure every word matters. So if your character does something, it has to matter, and otherwise, why do it?
I know I'm not interested in padding a word to count.
Yeah, and I've seen some pretty bad padded word counts.
The benefits of being an editor as well as a writer.
Yeah, side note, if you submit, do not have one half of the story be adjectives and adverbs. Make me cringe. Okay, that's a good time to stop. Anyhow, I suppose the consequence of me thinking about adjectives and adverbs.
Great, we're going to rage quit an episode.
Rage quit. Yeah, okay. On that pleasant note, thanks again for listening, and check us out on the web at writegoodbooks.com/podcast, and it'd be great if you visit our Patreon page if you're into that sort of thing.
Even if you're not,
Even
go
if you're
there.
not, yeah.
The consequences of visiting that are slim to none.
Yeah, very true, very true. Shameless promotion is over. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.
See ya.